During a hearing, Attorney General Pam Bondi was questioned about a presidential memorandum known as NSPM-7, which claimed to address domestic terrorism.
They want you to believe this is about safety, but what you're about to hear sounds a lot more like a secret enemies list. Watch closely how Pam Bondi dodges when she's cornered.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Actually, I think the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi, I'm here. On September 25th, President Trump signed a memorandum known as NSPM-7, purporting to address domestic terrorism. But Americans across the political spectrum were immediately alarmed by the memo's blurring of the line between unlawful conduct and constitutionally protected speech and activity, as well as its call to investigate, prosecute, and dismantle groups that the president and Stephen Miller described without evidence as, quote, an organized campaign of radical left terrorism. Now, counterterrorism experts were further alarmed by the administration's singular focus on left-wing extremism, combined with the sudden deletion from the DOJ website of decades of research and law enforcement analysis, which had concluded that right-wing extremism poses the greatest terrorism threat to Americans. The president's memo broadly and vaguely links violent conduct to ideologies, and it targeted specifically anti-American, anti-Christian, and anti-capitalist beliefs, as well as, quote, hostility to so-called traditional American views on family, religion, and morality, end quote. President Trump has repeatedly and openly, however falsely, tried to brand his political opponents with these sentiments listed in his memo. But as you know, as a lawyer, holding beliefs that the White House disagrees with is not a crime. And the statute defining domestic terrorism requires criminal acts, not just thoughts and ideas. That's why legal experts, nonprofit leaders, religious freedom, and civil rights advocates immediately raised the alarm that the new presidential directive was a politically motivated attack on civil society designed to silence those who disagree with the administration. So, Ms. Bondi, Section 3 of that memo directed you, as Attorney General, to submit to the President and Stephen Miller a list of groups or entities whose members are engaged in acts that meet the definition of domestic terrorism. And then on December 4th, you directed the FBI to work with a variety of law enforcement entities to compile a list of groups and entities engaged in such acts by January 3rd, 2026, and to update that report every 30 days thereafter. So can we assume that you or persons under your direction at the Department of Justice have prepared that list of groups or entities who are designated as domestic terrorist organizations? And I just remind you, that's a yes or no question. Did you prepare the list?
I'm not going to answer it yes or no, but what I will say is I know Antifa is part of that. I will talk to you about that.
I'm reclaiming my time. I asked you whether you
an Antifa member was arrested in Minneapolis federal court for
my time. Did you
they
have
ask a question and don't want an answer.
The answer is yes or no.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Gentlelady can proceed.
Okay. So will you commit to providing this committee with any list of organizations that you have recommended be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
We will comply with the law in all matters.
Will you commit to provide this committee with your list of entities that you recommend be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
I'm not going to commit to anything to you because you won't let me answer questions.
Okay, well then we do understand that your current position is that you have a secret list of people or groups that you are accusing of domestic terrorism, but you won't share it with Congress. And I'd remind you that when the US government designates an entity as a foreign terrorist organization, it must report that to Congress and to the entity, because the government can make a mistake and the entity has the opportunity to contest it. So your position seems to be that if you falsely designate an American or an American organization as a terrorist group, there's nothing they can do about it. I think we get it. You don't want to answer the question.
No, you don't get anything regarding public safety.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Thank you for the insult. It's clear you didn't come to Congress prepared to answer questions that the American people have every right to have answered, but if you were to prepared to answer truthfully, here's what we expect the facts to show. The administration is keeping lists of Americans who the White House says are engaged in domestic terrorism. Those lists could include Americans who have not committed any acts of terrorism, but simply disagree with this administration, people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And your list may include clergy, elected officials, and members of indivisible groups across the country. And those lists likely don't include Proud Boys or Oath Keepers who were actually convicted. Americans have never tolerated political demagogues who use the government to punish people on an enemies list. It brought down McCarthy, it brought down Nixon, and it will bring down this administration as well.
And you were right.
I yield back.
That's why we're so glad they rescinded the
That's right.
memorandum targeting parents. For goodness sake, as the gentleman from California just pointed out in his 5 minutes.
When Mary Gay Scanlon took the microphone, she wasn't playing politics. She was defending the Constitution in real time. Scanlon laid out, piece by piece, how the Trump administration quietly blurred the line between actual domestic terrorism and constitutionally protected speech, using a sweeping memo to justify surveillance and investigation of left-leaning groups with no evidence of criminal activity. She reminded everyone that beliefs are not crimes, dissent is not terrorism, and disagreement with the White House is not grounds for prosecution in a democracy. What made this exchange explosive wasn't just the policy, it was Pam Bondi admitting, under pressure, that a list of groups accused of domestic terrorism exists while refusing to share it with Congress. No transparency, no due process, no accountability. Instead, deflection, hostility, and an alarming suggestion that Americans could be labeled extremists without notice, explanation, or the ability to challenge the accusation. This is the same tired authoritarian playbook America has seen before. Weaponize fear, target political opponents, and wrap it all in the language of public safety. Scanlon cut through that smokescreen and made something crystal clear. A government that keeps secret lists of citizens it considers enemies is not protecting democracy, it is threatening it. If the administration were serious about confronting real domestic terrorism, it would be going after groups with proven violent records, not civil rights advocates, clergy, organizers, or people who simply refuse to fall in line. This moment matters because it exposes how fragile freedom becomes when power goes unchecked. And if this kind of abuse is allowed to stand, it won't stop with activists. It never does. Watch this clip, share it everywhere, and make sure people understand exactly what's being done in their name.
They want you to believe this is about safety, but what unfolded in Congress sounded more like a secret enemies list. During a hearing, Attorney General Pam Bondi was questioned about a presidential memorandum known as NSPM-7, which claimed to address domestic terrorism. Critics warned that the memo blurred the line between criminal acts and constitutionally protected speech, while targeting left-wing groups without clear evidence. The memo also connected domestic terrorism to beliefs described as anti-American, anti-Christian, or anti-capitalist, as well as opposition to traditional views on family, religion, and morality. But as the questioning made clear, holding unpopular political opinions is not a crime. Domestic terrorism's laws require criminal conduct, not simply thoughts, beliefs, or disagreement with the White House. The most troubling moment came when Bondi was asked whether the Justice Department had created a list of groups considered domestic terrorist organizations. She refused to answer directly, but mentioned Antifa and an arrest in Minneapolis. When pressed again, she still would not promise to share the list with Congress, raising fears that Americans could be labeled extremists without notice, evidence, or a chance to challenge the accusation. Critics argued that such a policy could target activists, clergy members, elected officials, and ordinary citizens while ignoring groups with documented records of violence. They compared the approach to earlier periods when government power was used against political opponents, warning that fear and claims of public safety can become tools for suppressing dissent. The message from the hearing was simple. Beliefs are not crimes, dissent is not terrorism, and disagreement is not grounds for prosecution in a democracy. If the administration is serious about confronting domestic terrorism, it should focus on proven violence, not people who refuse to fall in line. A government that keeps secret lists of supposed enemies is not protecting democracy. It is putting freedom at risk.